Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Research Express model rocket from Apogee Components. And so this is a fairly basic model rocket, although it's got a nice size to it here. It does have a nice slotted body tube, so it makes the fins go together easier. And we'll just open this up and see what we've got. Okay, so first of all, when you pull out the instructions, make sure there's nothing inside of them. Okay, sometimes decals and such get caught in there. Okay, so we've got our body tube here. Now the thing is that they give us a whole bunch of part numbers and not necessarily descriptions, but we'll get through it here. Looks like you've got a coupon for a free rocket stand with additional purchase. Alright, here are our fins. These are really thick fins for a rocket this size. It does mean that if you want to practice airfoiling, these are good ones to do that. Alright, we've got our motor mount tube. Alright, we've got a second body tube here. Now I don't know that this can actually be done as a payloader. It looks like it's not at least intended that way. That doesn't mean you can't do it. Okay, we've got a self-stick decal sheet there. Kevlar shock cord. We've got a parachute kit. Okay, and this is one that can actually be cut to a different size. You can cut this, I think, to a 12-inch or a 9-inch, maybe there. But you do have to self-assemble. You have to assemble the shroud lines and everything. Not a big deal. But if you're used to Estes kits that have pre-assembled parachutes, this one's got a little more work to be done. All right, we've got a tube coupler. Oh, it does, and there is a bulkhead here, so that yes, this can be done as a payload rocket here. Good to know. Okay, plastic nose cone, and then we've got lots of little small parts in here that we'll take out. Oh, there's another one. Alright, so we have two launch lugs. Two centering rings, engine block ring, and then we've got our engine clip and a screw eye here that will go into this bulkhead. Okay, so just kind of looking at this, looks like we've got it all. Alright, so I'm going to set most of this aside and then we will get started. The instructions call for sanding the fins first before we even take them out. Alright, and it recommends 200 grit sandpaper. I've got some 220 here. And so we're just going to sand the faces. Alright, and just check the wood. Now, a lot of times we would start with a coarser grit sandpaper, like maybe 150. The instructions are going directly to 200. But if you want, and especially if you've got some really coarse grain here, you might go down to a 150 grit sandpaper first and then come back to the 220 or 200 here. I'm just going to give it a little more effort here and then we'll call it good. Alright, so now we've got this fairly smooth. Now we are going to come back and sand this some more after we get the fins out of the stock material here. So if you don't necessarily have to get everything perfect here because we're going to want to shape the fins anyway. Alright, I'm going to set this aside for just a moment while I clean off all the sanding dust, and we'll come back and take the fins out. Okay, now just take your hobby knife here and kind of ease these out. They're laser cut already, so there's usually just a little very small nub that connects these to the stock. Alright, and if it feels like it's resisting a lot, just don't try and do it in one cut, do several. Alright, but usually they'll just fall out like that. And just do the same for the rest of them. Okay, the old stock can be set aside or thrown away. Now for these we're going to want to do a little sanding on the edges first of all. Here I'm actually going to go to a little bit coarser grain. So this is 150 grit sandpaper, and first I'm just going to put the sandpaper flat, and I'm just going to pull each edge across to remove most of the soot there. Now the root edge tab here, don't sand that too much because we don't want to change the distance of the tab between the edge and the fin itself. So just a little bit there to get any imperfections off or any of the remaining connections there. Okay, and some people will like to go ahead, and you can, is stack these all together. Alright, and then you can do all the edges at once, usually. Sometimes you get one that just wants to stick out further or something like that. Either way is appropriate. If you want to do each fin individually or just do them as a stack here. Okay, so with our big thick fins here, just a minute here, I need to get the root edge of those ones. There we go. Okay, so we've got these really thick fins, and even though they're lightweight, they're not very aerodynamic. Okay, so this is, this is the leading edge here, and you're trying to push that through the air. So we're going to want to round these at the very least. In the instructions, it shows either rounding the fins, all right, where you round the leading and trailing edges, or you could airfoil it, where you round the leading edge and you taper the trailing edge. Airfoiled fins will give better performance. They tend to fly higher, but they're also weaker, and so this is a little bit of a trade-off. I've had lots of cases where airfoiled fins hit just in the wrong position on landing and it cracks that fin because that trailing edge is so thin. So most of the time I prefer just to round my edges on my model rockets, because even just rounding the edges gives you like a 80% better performance than if you leave them straight like that. And you still have the strength of most of the fin. Okay, so it's kind of up to you how you want to do this. Again, I'm going to use the 150 grit here for shaping. Sometimes with this thickness, you might even want to go down to 100 grit. But I'm going to go with this. And we're going to do this to all three fins, but I'm just going to do it once here, and then we'll do the others off camera. All right, but the first thing I want to do is drop these edges down. So first, I'm not even going to try and round them yet. I'm just going to sand those edges a couple of times here just to knock them over a little bit. Okay, so that now we no longer have that sharp edge on either side. We'll do the same for the trailing edge here in a moment. So you can just do this a couple of times. And one of the things that having this thick fin gives an advantage of is the fin doesn't bow as much when you're sanding like this. So the pressure of your sandpaper here tends to cause this to bow inward, and so you get an uneven rounding there. So you always want to watch that. I like to check my cross section here on both edges to make sure that I'm rounding proportionally and evenly. Alright, now once we've got that knocked down, we can start rounding over. I'm just rotating my wrist here, running my hand around. Alright, and again, I'm going to go ahead and check my two cross sections here. They look pretty even. I've got just a little bit of the flatness left there. We'll sand that a little bit more. Okay. It's usually here that I find I've been doing one edge more kind of unconsciously. But nope, that one came out really well. Okay, so we've got an even rounding, or close to even rounding there. And the rounded edge goes all the way across here. There's no flat spot. Okay, that's what we're looking for. Now, if you're going to airfoil this, then you're going to taper this, and I would actually say make a line across here with a pencil from the root tab or so. Do that on both sides, and then you can taper that down to a knife edge there. Some people like to shape the entire fin, going from the rounded and tapering it down. That takes a lot of practice, I'll tell you right now. Okay, and as I said, I'm just going to round mine. So the trailing edge here, I'm going to do just like I did the leading edge. So first we'll just knock down those corners on the edges there a bit. Alright, and then just like I did before, just going to start rounding that over. Okay, and again, I'm going to check my cross sections here. Those are looking pretty good. Still got some flat space there. Okay, now this one I've got a little more sanding on this side than the other. Alright, and actually if you look at the sanding edge there, I'm getting a little bit of bias in my pressure, and that's just something, it happens unconsciously. Alright, so just check that and shape it back the way it needs to be. Yeah, now this one's too long. Okay, that looks pretty good. That looks good. I'm going to call that one good. Okay, so I've got a rounded leading and trailing edge there. My tip edge, generally I just leave that flat. It turns out that in most cases it doesn't really help too much to round that as well. Okay, I'm going to check my root edge here, make sure there's nothing protruding. And again, do not sand down this tab. That's actually going to help keep the fin better attached to the rocket's airframe. Okay, so I'm going to go off camera now and do the other two fins in the same manner. I've sanded all three fins, and off camera I also did some additional sanding with the 220 grit sandpaper once more. So I'm going to do it here on camera with the last fin. And all I'm doing is just going over the same area that I've rounded, but with the finer sandpaper, and just enough to take off any rough spots there. Okay. Now you may notice, especially on the tip edges here, that we've got some pores in the wood, and that's just one of the things about working, especially with a really soft wood like balsa here, is that you do have wood grain, you have wood pores, things like that. And the next thing we're going to do is fill those in. So if we come back to our directions here, alright, so they're applying a coat of sanding sealer. I'm going to show you a little bit different way to do this, and I'm kind of surprised that Apogee does not put it in their instructions. It's because it's in one of their videos that I learned how to do this little trick here. So for this part, you're going to need a piece of corrugated cardboard. Now if you just have a small box or a box lid that you cut off or something like that, this is something I have my students make in my rocketry classes. We take some corrugated cardboard and make a rocket stand using a dead motor. But this actually tilts nicely, which comes in handy here. You're going to need some straight pins. The thinner the better. Okay, in this case these are dissection pins, but you can use sewing pins as well. And what we're going to do is we're going to take those pins and put them into the root edge. All right, they don't have to go very far, 3 millimeters or so, 1/8 of an inch. Just enough that they don't come out under the force of gravity here. And you also want to be careful it doesn't poke out the side and stab you in the finger. Alright, now this is a polyurethane based sanding sealer. I think mine's made by Minwax. I put it into these small jars just so I don't have to have that big can all the time. And so what I'm going to do here, instead of using a paintbrush, I'm using a cotton applicator just because it's cheap and disposable. Alright, and what we're going to do is just brush this on. Now try and keep it off the root edge there, or I just got some on. We'll sand it later. And what this does is it fills in the low spots. So the coarse grain here will be filled in. The instructions call for 1 coat of this. I usually use 2. It takes about an hour for this stuff to dry normally. And so once it's dry, we'll go ahead and sand it with 200 grit sandpaper again. And that will take off the excess off the surface, but will leave the grain and the pores filled. And then after that's been sanded, you can put another coat on. If you want a really, really fine finish, you can actually use 3 or 4 coats. But I find that 2 is usually enough, especially if you use a good primer before you paint it. Okay, so there's one of them there. And now I'm going to take that, and the pin is just going to go into one of these corrugated holes, and that will hold it there. Now, definitely have something protecting your work surface, because if you get too much on there, it will drip off the edges. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with the other 2 fins off camera and then come back. While the sanding sealer dries, we'll go ahead and move on to the construction of the motor mount. So the first thing we're going to do is make a couple of measurements here. So we're going to need to take the motor mount tube, and from each end we're going to measure 1/2 inch, or 13 millimeters for the metrically inclined. Okay, so that's going to be right here. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to off-center them a little bit, because when we start putting the motor mount clip on there, it tends to hide the marks if they're in line. Okay, so there's another 1/2 inch right there. Okay, and then we're going to take our hobby knife again, and we're going to designate here that this end is the aft end or rear end. I'm just going to pencil that in, just so I don't forget and get this turned around. So on the forward end here, we need to make about an 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter slot. Right about there. Okay, and then our engine clip here, the right angle goes in that little slot we just made. Okay, and then our engine block or thrust ring here will go inside and rest against that. Okay. So what we're going to do now is take a little bit of wood glue. Okay, you can also use white glue if you don't have wood glue. It just takes longer to dry. Now usually when we put something in a tube, we glue the inside of the tube and then put the object in. I don't do that for thrust rings, and the reason why is if I put glue inside this tube and put the thrust ring in, excess glue is going to get forced past the engine clip there and could interfere with proper engine mounting. Alright, so if I put it on the ring, then any excess glue gets forced to the outside. Okay, and you can smooth that out with a finger, like such. Alright, and then we'll just pop that right in. You do want to put this in immediately because these types of glues tend to swell cardboard. So if you wait too long, they get too big and they don't go together properly. Alright, so now we want that setting right on top of that engine clip, and we want it level. We don't want this going way down below there. Okay, so that looks pretty good there. I'll set that down for a moment. Wipe off my hands. Okay, then we're going to put the aft ring on first, but we're going to slide it in over the forward end. So this is going to go on like this. Right, now if that's not going in easily, take your thumbnail here and just kind of push that edge inward. See if that gives you a better fit, and it should. If it doesn't, you can do the same thing to the inside edge of this and push it outward with your thumbnail. Alright, that'll make it slide on easier. Okay, so we're going to slide this all the way, not quite down yet. So now I'm going to put some glue on this, just above my mark there. And try and keep it off the clip. It's not a big deal if you get it on there, because that part won't be bending. Alright, and again, do this fairly quickly so the glue does not grab. Okay, and we're just going to ease that down until we get to that line. Alright, and now you can just smooth away any excess glue there. Do keep it off the outer surface of the ring. Alright, that makes a nice fillet there. If you get any more excess, you can put a fillet on the inside too. You don't really need both with 18mm motors. Alright, now for the forward ring here, we need to cut a notch in it, and this is so we can mount the shock cord to the engine mount here. So I'm trying to cut about halfway through the thickness. I don't want to cut all the way through the ring. Alright, and you don't necessarily have to do this all in one cut. So if you make a cut, come back, try again. That actually looks pretty good there. Okay, so we'll come to our next page. Alright, so now we're going to take our shock cord right here. Okay, and we're going to tie this onto the motor mount tube here. Okay, personally I want some sort of slip knot to do this. So the easiest way here is you tie an overhand knot around the loop here part, like this. Alright, so that our loop can go freely there. You can just tighten that down. Alright, so now we've got a slip knot that allows us to change the diameter here. Alright, I'm going to bring that down to about here. Alright, pull it taut. And then we take our notched ring. Alright, you're going to take, first of all, you have to pass the shock cord all the way through it. Okay, and now we're going to make sure that the cord's going through that notch. Now again, you may have to do a little widening of the ring here. Just take your thumbnail in there. Alright, we'll come back. There we go. Okay, so this is just going to go almost flush. I'm going to leave just a little bit there. Okay, and then we're going to bring that nice and tight against there. Okay, and then we're going to take our glue once more. And we're going to make a fillet here. In this case, we want it fairly thick, and we want it to completely cover the shock cord. Right, so now I can take my finger, move this around, and we're embedding that Kevlar shock cord into the glue all the way around. All right, now again, we don't want glue on the surface there. We'll take that off. Okay, this little part that's kind of dangling out, I'm just going to kind of tack that down with some glue there, just so it stays out of the way. Okay, now we are going to put this into the body tube, but we want this to go ahead and fully dry so it doesn't shift on us. And I'm going to go ahead and put a forward fillet here on this part, since we didn't glue it underneath. If you're really careful, you can glue it like you would the other one, but it tends to get really messy. So I prefer to do it this way. Alright, so I'm going to set that whole assembly aside to dry. While we're waiting still for the engine mount to dry and for the fins to dry, I'm going to go ahead and skip down a little bit and assemble the payload bay. Alright, so the first thing we'll need is this bulkhead and the screw eye here. And we want to put this, if you look at the edge of this, it's ever so slightly tapered that way. So this is the side that will go into the coupler. Take the screw eye here and just, first of all, thread it in. Alright, if you can't get quite enough leverage doing that, you can use a pair of pliers or put a screwdriver in there. Okay, but really all we need to do first of all is just get enough so that we have the straight part. So this is tapered here. You want it so that the straight part of the threads have made it all the way through, and that's at least pretty close. Alright, now I'm going to back this out again. And I'm going to put some glue right in the hole. It does not have to go through the hole necessarily. Okay, just about that amount there. Now I'm going to thread this back in. And it should go easier now because we've pre-threaded the wood, and the glue actually acts as a lubricant. Alright, I want to go in there just so I can still see some threads there. It got covered by glue. But you want just like one turn worth of threads still on the outside. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and glue both sides. Okay, now this side's good. It actually has a nice bead of glue going all the way around there already. Okay, here I'm just going to move that around so that when it dries, it pretty much locks that thing in place. Okay, now I'm going to take the coupler here, and I need to measure 1/2 inch from one end. Half an inch is always where my thumb wants to go. Okay, and this is going to go into the payload tube to that point. Okay, this is a little bit different from lots of other payloader kits that usually have a 1/2 and 1/2 here. Alright, so just be aware of that. Now we're going to take our wood glue here and we're going to put a bead of glue just inside of one end of the payload bay. Okay, and this will become the aft section. Alright, so just kind of turn it back and forth as we insert that up to that line. Alright, now for the nose cone, this is just sitting there in place. Alright, we need to glue that. Here I recommend using a tube type plastic cement rather than a brush on one, unless the brush on one's really thick. Alright, put an even bead of glue, there we go, just inside here. Now you don't want too much or it'll just melt the plastic. So let's kind of even that out around there. Man, that's difficult glue today. Got a little on the outside, we'll take that off. Do that quickly so you don't smear it all over. Alright, now we're just going to put that on. I'm going to turn it back and forth a little bit to seat it well, and we'll let that dry. Okay, now we're going to come back here with our bulkhead there, and that's going to fit right inside of our coupler. Okay, so here again I'm going to put a bead of glue just inside the aft end of the coupler. I'll put that in, kind of twist it around too, and I'm going to leave a little bit of an edge. I'm not going to make it flush here. I'm going to leave like 2 millimeters worth of edge all the way around there. I'm going to let this dry, and then once it's dried enough that it's not moving, we'll fill in this edge with a fillet of wood glue as well. So I'm going to take a little bit of break here while we watch all the glue dry, and when we come back, we'll assemble this whole thing together. The glue has dried on the coupler and on the nose cone here enough that we can handle it. And so as I mentioned before, I'm going to go ahead and put a fillet of glue right around here. Okay, we can just smooth that in with the fingertip here. Okay, and make sure we don't have any on the outside of the coupler there. Now for the nose cone, I'm going to show you how they're doing it and then another option. Okay, the key here is you want this to be really, really snug. I have had so many payloader rockets that on ejection and the parachute release, that sudden decrease decreased acceleration there pops that nose cone out, even if I've got tape around it and such. So their solution is to put masking tape around the base. Now here you want to make sure it's not coming up onto the nose cone itself. Okay, you can wrap that around. And you may have to adjust it. Okay, now in my case that is now too thick, so we can just peel back a little bit. Okay, now that's pretty snug, but even with that I've had these pop off. Alright, so another thing you can do use a plastic rivet like this. Now, I get these from Amazon. They're called reusable plastic rivets. You can find them in some automotive stores as well, in the section that'll have like the interior attachments and things like that. For something like this, you just need one of them. And they come in different sizes. I believe this is a 4mm. And what you would do here is just drill a hole through the tube and the base of the nose cone that's big enough to accept this. And then you just push that in and you push the plunger down, and these little fingers here spread and hold it in. Okay. But you do have to buy those separately. So for now, we'll go ahead and do it this way. Now, once this glue fully dries, this can be painted. Now, depending on how you want your paint scheme to go, you can paint all this one color, including the nose. You can paint the nose one color, the payload bay another color, the main part of the rocket another color. That's up to you. In fact, they don't even show here, since it's all in black and white, what the paint scheme recommended is, so they may not have one. All right, now, so for this one, we're still going to have to wait for all this glue to dry there, and I'm just going to set that aside. Okay, now bringing back our motor mount. That's looking pretty good. Most of the glue is dry. Okay, so if we come back to that section here, so the first thing we want to do is take our shock cord here, and we're going to pass it down through the front and out the back end of the tube, and this is just going to keep it from getting glue on it. Okay, and then we're going to take our main body tube here, and right now we're just going to do a dry test fit. Now, my personal preference is to have the engine clip on the same side as the launch lugs. So these two slots here, these two smaller ones, are for the launch lugs. So I'm going to just push this in, all right, and make sure that my engine clip is underneath that particular slot. All right, and what they're showing here is that our aft engine ring, or centering ring there, is flush with the body tube. Okay, in fact, you can put it just a little bit inside if you want. The main thing to check here is you should not see the edges of your centering rings in any of the fin slots here, and there shouldn't be anything sticking up on there. Okay, so mine looks pretty good. Now, the other thing to do here, instead of trying to put a big blob of glue on here and shove it all the way through, we're going to take another cotton applicator here, and I'm just going to put some glue on that. Okay, and then I'm going to put this glue right above the forward end of the fin slots. And that's where that first centering ring is going to go. It's going to go all around there. Okay, now I'm going to put this in just part way, and now I'm going to take some more glue and put it right inside there. Now this does get some glue on the motor mount tube, so we don't want it very heavy. So if we get big globs of glue there, it might interfere with the fins. Okay. Just going to kind of making sure here that I've got glue all the way around. Okay, so I'm going to turn this once more so my engine clip will be underneath the launch lugs, and that's going in. I'm going to push that in just so there's a little bit of a lip there. Just a little tiny amount. Alright, and so now we've got a little bit of glue inside there, and we can try removing that. least knocking it down. Okay, it's not very thick, so I'm not too worried about it. We'll spread it out a little bit there. Okay, and so now we can take our glue once more here. I'll put the cap back on. And we are ready to put fins on. Now, if this is wobbling in and out of there really loosely, let it dry, but it's already grabbed on there. However, our fins are still drying. Let me check these. Okay, that one's pretty good. So at this point, if you're kind of following at the same pace as I've been making this, you've got one coat of sanding sealer on the fins. We're going to sand this with some 220 grit sandpaper. There's a blob on there we'll just take off. Okay, and if you decide that that's enough for you, then we can move on to putting the fins on. But at this point, I'm going to have to stop again, sand the fins, probably recoat them with sanding sealer, and then wait again here. So at this point, once I get these going, I'm going to come back while they're drying again, and we'll assemble the parachute. I've sanded my fins and given them another coat of sanding sealer, so they're off drying again. So during this time, since everything we're waiting for is still drying, we'll go ahead and assemble the parachute here. Okay, so that's just a backing piece, we don't need it. Alright, we've got some string, some plastic sheet, and some reinforcements. Something you may want to add is a snap swivel like this. Now this doesn't come with the kit. You can get this in the fishing section of department stores and sporting goods stores. But this allows you to easily change the parachute out, put a new one on, take an old one off, however you want to do it. And theoretically at least, it also helps keep it from winding up so much. That part is not so good, but it's the main thing is it lets you change your parachutes out really quickly. Okay, so just go ahead and spread this out, and you're going to need a pair of scissors. Now this parachute sheet can be used for both 12-inch and 8-inch parachutes. We want the 12-inch, so we're going to cut this out along the outer dotted lines there. You can start just about anywhere here. If you got good sharp scissors, they'll just kind of flow along. Found a dull spot. Oops. Alright, that wasn't so hot. Now we're going to take these reinforcements and we're going to stick those right over the circles that are outlined here. Now save that one I cut into for last here. Alright, so here if you do happen to cut into the corner like I did, a bit of a humbling experience there, go ahead and put this on, making sure that you close up the cut. And then if you can get more of these, you can just use the ones that are made for reinforcing paper. So you can get these at most business supply places. And so here it's a little bit bigger, but that's okay. I'm going to stick one on the back side here as well for additional reinforcement. Alright, and that's just on the one that I cut. You don't need it on the other ones. Alright, once you've got it to this point, you want to take a pen or a pencil and poke through here. And I suggest poking through from the back side. Alright, so you just poke a hole there. You don't want to use a hobby knife for this, because the hobby knife, if you push too hard, will cut through the reinforcement ring. We don't want that. So we want kind of a blunt hole there. Okay, now here's our one. We want to get in between both of those reinforcements that we put on the cut one there. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Alright, now for our strings, first we have to untie this without making a big knot. You know, if you really want to make a big knot, I guess you can go ahead, but I prefer not to. So just kind of loosely pull this apart. Okay, we need to cut this into 3 equal pieces. Now I'm going to get a knot anyway. Come on there. Alright. So the way to do that is you hold one end in one hand. Alright, and I'm just going to start making a loop here. So I've got it looped around one finger of my other hand. And then I'm going to make another loop on a finger of the hand that's holding this. And then with my opposite hand again, I'm going to grab the other end. Unfortunately, I can't get this whole thing under. Alright, so in one hand here, I've got an end and a loop. And in my other hand, I've got an end and a loop. Okay, so now I'm just going to bring those together from one side. And I'm just going to cut all those off evenly. Okay. Now, while holding that, I'm going to string this through my fingers. String the string. And do the same thing over here. Just cut off that little end. So now I have 3 equal-sized strings there. And then we're just going to tie these on to adjacent corners using a double knot or 2 half hitches here. And the biggest trick is trying to get about the same amount of used thread for each knot. And that just takes a little practice. It's hard to actually think about it, you just do it. And sometimes you don't. But unless you get really carried away on one side versus another, it's usually going to be fine. Okay, so that's 2 adjacent corners there, and then we just continue this with the other 2 strings. So now we'll go to the back side here, and we'll just take each of these loops, and I'm just going to put them around a finger here and hook them on. And then I'm going to grab the middle of the parachute here, all right, and just pull everything tight. And if we did this right, all of those corners should be meeting at about the same spot. And they are. They're pretty close there. Okay, now, attaching the parachute, I don't recommend until after you've painted it. All right, and then we have two ways of doing it. So we can do it the way that are in the instructions. This is more or less permanent. So you take all those loops there and you thread them through the eyelet of the payload bay, okay, like that, and then you put the entire parachute through those loops like this, and you pull it down tight. Now, I am not going to pull it down tight because I'm not going to mount mine this way. I'm going to take this back off. All right, now if you are going to use this way, again, I recommend doing this after you've got your payload bay all painted. Okay, now if we want to use the snap swivel, all right, we start off in the same way here. So I'm going to get all my parachute loops. Actually, I'm going to redo this. Who knows how tangled I got them there. All right, so once more, get your parachute loops, hold on to the middle of the parachute. All right, and you can move those loops back and forth till you get all of the corners in line there. Okay, now I'm going to have to squish this down really tight, and I'm going to stick it through the eyelet of my snap swivel. Okay, so you want the round part, not the clip-on part. So pull that through, reform the loops. Okay, and now I'm going to push the entire snap swivel through the loops. All right, and pull that down nice and tight until it forms a really nice little knot there on the swivel end. Once you have your knot where you want it, then go ahead and just take a little dab of your wood glue here. Put that on the knot. It does not take a lot. And then just work that in with your finger here. Okay, and then we'll let that dry before you install it into the rocket. But now you have the advantage of being able to remove this from your rocket or put it back on. So you just open up the snap side, put that on here. And a lot of Rocketeers don't like to store their parachutes inside their rocket when they're not actually flying. And so this makes it very easy then. You can take this back out after your flight, hang it up or put it in a shoebox or wherever it happens that you want to store it. And then when it's flight time again, you simply clip it back on. This also gives you the advantage of changing parachutes. So maybe your payload here is a little bit heavier than usual and you want to put a 15-inch parachute on instead of this 12-inch. All right, easily take one off, put the other one on. Or maybe you've got a really windy day and you don't want this flying into the next county. You could put on maybe the 8-inch parachute rather than the 12-inch. So just by using these, it gives you a lot more versatility. Now, I don't recommend putting this on until you paint it. That way you don't have to worry about getting paint on your parachute or anything like that. Just set it aside. Alright, so I'm going to set aside both the parachute and my payload bay because we're still waiting for sanding sealer to dry on the fins. At last, the fins are finished. So these have had 2 coats of the polyurethane-based sanding sealer. They've been sanded with 200 grit sandpaper in between. And this is about what you should see here, where there's still a little bit of the gloss, but most of that has been sanded off. And so most of that is down in the coarser areas here. And again, this can be repeated several times till you get the finish that you want. Okay, now to mount these in, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and thread the shock cord back up through the rocket here. Okay, just pull that gently through there. Okay, I'm going to do a dry fit here to make sure we don't need to adjust our fin tabs. Okay, so that's encountering a little resistance, but I'm not sure where. Okay, so if you get something like that, go ahead and take some a little bit coarser sandpaper, some 150 or some 100 grit, and you're just going to sand a little bit here on the fin tab itself, not on the fin. Okay, a lot of times this gets caused by getting some sanding sealer on the fin tab, which I did. Okay, kind of wiggle that in. Something you'll see, and this happens on every model I've made that has the fin slots in it, is the cardboard around here may often buckle up or down, usually up. It's not that noticeable, but it's something to be aware of. All right, now also notice here there's a little tiny gap there and there, and that means my fin tab is still a little bit too long. And so here we can just take our sandpaper again and just run that over a couple of times. Don't do a whole lot at once. Okay, but it should, what we want to have is the fin tab be in contact with the motor mount, and then the actual fin edges here, the root edges, should be in contact with the tube, just like that. Okay, and we can go ahead and go around with the other fins here, do kind of the same thing. Okay, that one's pretty good already. Alright, so now we're ready to do some gluing. Here again, I recommend using a wood glue. Now I've been using two of them here. Both of these are wood glues. One's just white and the other one's yellow. They're both actual wood glues here. Alright, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put a bead of glue, not very heavy, right along the edges here. Alright, and I'm going to put that onto my rocket, and I'm going to pull right back off again. And now I'm going to let this dry for about 30 to 60 seconds. So I'm going to put that here, and I'll come back after that time has elapsed. About 60 seconds have elapsed, and now I'm going to put this back together here. Alright, and hold that in place for just a few seconds. And what this has done is the glue has become tacky as it dried slightly there, and that just makes it grab better. Alright, now I'm just going to go ahead and look down the length here and make sure my fin is actually perpendicular to the tube. And now let this dry for at least 10 minutes, and then you can go on and do the other two fins in the same manner. Okay, so once this has had about 10 minutes to dry, you can go ahead and go to the next one, do the same thing, apply some glue, stick it in there, pull it out, let it get tacky, wait another 10 minutes. Okay, I'm going to do the rest of this off camera and come back when I've got all the fins on. My fins are dry and look pretty good there. And so we'll put fillets in here in just a minute. I'm just debating trying to put, if I wanted to put fillets in before I put that launch lug in there. But I think I'll have enough room to get my finger in there. So we need our launch lugs next. And these are meant to go into these slots here. So just like with the fins, we'll glue these on using some wood glue. nice thing about having the pre-cut slots on there is it makes it a lot easier to get these on straight. But even so, you want to make sure and sight down the tube to make sure that it's not canted a little bit. Use my little rack here. Alright, and we'll do the same thing with the other one. Now do be careful, make sure that the shock cord is not visible in that slot, because we don't want to glue the shock cord to the launch lug. Put that one in there, and again we will sight down the length and make sure everything is in line, and it is. So once again, we're going to wait for glue to dry. The glue on the launch lugs has now set sufficiently that we can work with it. And now we need to apply fillets all the way around. Now you can do these all at once as long as you keep the rocket horizontal. Alright, now and here's something, I kind of mentioned this before, that this can happen where we've got a little bit of buckling of the tube there. And it's because it got pulled down a little bit as the glue dried. And as much as I really like pre-slotted tubes, because they're strong, it gives you a stronger fin mount and it's easier to keep them aligned, this happens a lot. Okay. Fortunately, it only happened in that one spot, it looks like. Okay, so for our fillets here, we're just going to add a bead of glue. That dip is going to require probably a little bit more. And I like to do two facing fins at a time here. We're also going to want to have some tissues handy or some paper towels because this gets messy. Alright, and now you can just take your finger here and smooth it in. This one I'm going to do it kind of both directions. Alright, and what we want ideally is not to have any of the base of the fin showing there. So we don't want to have any bare wood or edges along there. Now I'm going to take tissue here. This one's got a lot of excess glue because of that little dip. Okay. And now we just turn to the next set of fins. I'll do that one last since it's got the launch lugs. Alright, so we just continue this throughout the rocket. Alright, so it turns out that launch lug was not tacked down very well. The fillets will fix that. Okay, and now we're going to let this completely dry. And you can see here there's a few bubbles in some of these. That may create a discontinuity in the fillet. And then, up to your own personal preference. The fillets will still be strong if they got the air bubbles in it, but it won't be quite as aesthetically pleasing nor quite as aerodynamic. So this needs to set aside to dry for at least a good hour here before we go on. My glue fillets have dried, but the fin ones look fine. All right, even that one with a little bit of a dip in it, that's pretty filled. We can do a little bit on that. Okay, but on the launch lugs here, you can see some bubbles in some areas there where it kind of squished inward rather than staying flat. And so you can either add some more glue to those, or you can use some plastic model contour putty. Now this is available in several brands and consistencies. I really like the Testors one. The Testors contour putty, as it dries relatively quickly. And so you use this pretty much like you would use the glue. Alright, now this has been sitting for a while, so it gets kind of that liquid separation there. We really don't want that. I'm going to take that off. Alright, So let's get a cleaner one going here. Okay, so you just put this in alongside just like you would with a glue fillet. Use your finger to smooth that in. Now this starts drying almost right away, so you need to smooth them in really quickly or they get kind of granular and they don't stick well. A little excess there. Looks like it needs some more. All right, and this is usually sandable in about an hour. Okay, my aft one looks like it also needs some. And if you like really thick fillets that kind of really blend the fin into the body tube, you can use this for that, but you don't want to try and do it all at once. It's better to make several fillet layers rather than trying to make one big fillet. If you try and do one big fillet, for one thing it tends to sag and it just does not come out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in that little depression here. I'm not going to worry about it for the rest of the fins. So I'm going to keep that pretty tight. Alright, but that fills in that little depressed area really nicely. Okay, so after I let this dry, I'll do a little bit of fine sanding on it. Now you really don't want to wet sand this because it is somewhat water soluble. So you need to dry sand it, and be forewarned, it clogs up sandpaper pretty quickly. Okay, so I don't have a lot on here, but for example, some people like to fill in the spirals using this stuff, and you can do it. Just be aware you're going to go through a lot of sandpaper. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry, and then once we sand that, it'll be ready for painting. Here I have all of the fillets sanded, and everything's pretty much ready to go. So at this point, I'm going to take everything away to paint. It'll all get probably 2 coats of a filling primer. We may do a little bit of sanding in between there, and then we'll give it a couple of coats of the actual color, which I have not decided on quite yet, but when I come back I'll have it all painted. Here all the parts of my rocket have been painted. In each case, each part here had 2 coats of primer followed by 2 coats of the color here. Now if you want an even glossier finish, you can wet sand the paint using 600 to 800 grit sandpaper. Now you have to be very careful that you don't go through the paint if you're wet sanding, because then you'll hit the cardboard and that'll expand and it'll look awful, which is why I usually don't do it with small cardboard models like this. Our last thing to do is to simply put everything together. So first we'll take out our shock cord here. Alright, we're going to tie that onto the eyelet of our payload section. And here I just use a couple of overhand knots, 2 half hitches. Now because the Kevlar here tends to unravel like you see there, what I generally do is I'll put a little drop of super glue on that. Just the regular runny kind. I'm going to put some here, just a drop on the end there and a drop in the knot. And then I'm just going to take a tissue here and wipe off the excess. Alright. Now if you don't have super glue, you can also do the same thing using white glue or wood glue. This just dries quicker. Okay, and then we need our parachute here that we prepared before. Okay, so if you did the snap swivel, all you have to do is come snap this on. If you did it the permanent attachment, you'll have already tied this onto the screw eye there. Okay, now if you're preparing this for launch, put about 3 squares of recovery wadding down in there, or the equivalent amount of whatever recovering stuff you use. Sorry, mouth wasn't working there. Okay, and then my particular favorite way to fold parachutes right now is we fold this in half so that every corner has another corner overlapping it like this. Alright, and then I'm going to take these two corners and fold them down to the middle to overlap them. Same thing on the other side, we'll fold those over, so now all of our corners are in that one point. Alright, and then I will draw the shroud lines up, leaving about an inch or so sticking out there. Alright, and we simply fold one edge over, the other edge over, fold that in half, and then I just kind of roll this up. Okay, then we will just stuff the shock cord down inside. Okay, and then we'll slide the parachute down in there, and this should go in relatively easily. If it's getting caught or just not going down, pull it out and check and make sure there's not something in its way. Okay, we're going to close this part. Now this is acting as the nose cone, so one of the things I'm going to do, put my nose cone on there. Now this, I'm going to give it a shake. Alright, and this should not separate, but it should come apart fairly easily with just a little bit of a tug. Now remember earlier I said that we need to masking tape this, or you can use a plastic rivet through it. I'm going to use the rivet, and so I'm going to take this off camera to drill a hole, and then I'll come right back. Now this rivet is, if I remember right, a 4mm by 7 or 8 millimeters. And generally these do come in metric sizes, but if you're living in the US like I do, most of your drill bits come in imperial sizes. So start with something that looks like it might be a little bit smaller and work your way up. I used a 5/32 drill bit for this 4mm diameter rivet. So this just pops in like this, and then you just push down the plunger, and there's those little things on the end that kind of splay out, and that'll keep your nose cone really well attached there. Okay. I find this works a whole lot better than masking tape does. Alright, so all we have to do now is put on the decals. Right, so these are self-adhesive decals, and they're vinyl, so you can actually do a little trick with these that allows you to place them much more readily. And for that, we're going to need a little bit of soapy water. I'm going to go get that now and come back with it. Here I have a small basin to which I've added 1 drop of dishwashing detergent and then just filled it up about halfway with water here. And what this does is it temporarily makes the adhesive less sticky so that the decals can be placed and moved and such without making it permanent as soon as you touch the decal on there. Okay, and then once the water dries in about 24 hours, they become permanent. So here, I've got a red rocket, and so I may want to put some of these more in the green area, but I think that's going to be too long. All right, so we'll go with the red. And what I'm going to do here is these two I'm going to put so that the bottom parts here are between 2 of the fins, and it's going to be the 2 areas here that don't have the launch lug on them. I usually don't put decals in here for 2 reasons. One is that they tend to get worn down because of the launch rod, and 2, you may not see them on the launch stand. So you want to be able to have your rocket looking very nice on the launch pad there and showing off all the stickers. Alright, these guys are meant to go on the fins. The Apogee components here I'll probably put up on the payload section. Alright, so I'm going to do 1 or 2 of these and then do the rest of them off camera here. So just peel that off. Alright, put it in the water. Okay, now I'm going to use my stand here just to let me position this a little better. Alright, so again, I want mine to go kind of like this, where it's in between the fins, more or less equally. Okay, so I just kind of put that down with my finger. Make sure it looks okay. It looks a little off there, not quite on center, and so what I can do is just peel that back up again without any problems. Alright, put it back down. Get a little bit further over. No. Okay, so that looks a little better. Now, once you have it where you want to, take a tissue or a clean rag or a paper towel and just kind of squeegee the water out. Alright, and that will start its setting up to eventually become permanent. Okay, for the fins, as I said, I'm going to put one of these on each fin. Alright, these are more or less circular, so you know, if you want to put them with the rocket facing up, you can, or with the magnifying glass there, or somewhere in between. I'm going to kind of do mine somewhere in between here like this, and do that on each fin. Okay, so I'm going to do the rest of these off camera, and I'll come back when they're finished. So here's the final rocket. Now it turns out that these were intended to be placed 180 degrees apart, so you'd put one in between fins and one in line with the fin. I decided not to do that because I already had this one where I liked it there. So I just put them in line. Okay, we've got a little sticker on each fin there, and then the Apogee Components symbol there, or logo up on the payload section. Okay. So, not including painting, you can build this in about 2 hours, depending on how fast your glue dries. I am hoping I'll get to launch this this coming up weekend, although we have rain in the forecast, so we'll see. Regardless, I hope you had fun building this with me. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.